the work that I've done, I've really seen a huge shift since 9/11 of being either some people put a dead stop, no, we don't want to work with the military, and others are just that actually there is a great necessity in understanding the culture and understanding how the military works in areas in which to engage in some type of work environment. But then again, people put limits. A lot of it is beneficiaries of the populations in which they serve.
Hi, and welcome to the 1CA podcast. I'm your host, John McElligott. Today we're talking to two development professionals from Dexis, Karen Walsh and Bron Morrison. They're here to talk about what Dexis is, how Dexis differs from other development organizations, what they do around the world, and what the connection is to civil affairs in the military. And now I'll turn to Bron. Bron, if you could please introduce yourself for the audience.
Sure, it's a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having us on. I'm the Senior Director for our Center on Security and Stabilization. My background is I started off in Peace Corps, later went to work within UN Department of Peacekeeping Operations, where I often was embedded with UN militaries, served in Cambodia, the UNTAC, El Salvador, Mozambique. I then returned to the U.S. and started working with USAID partners, International Foundation for Election Systems, and then with the private sector that are implementing partners of USAID in the state. One is Creative Associates and DAI. And then I served as the Senior National Security Advisor to the President of Somalia on behalf of the Department of State, and then landed at Dexis about 2.5 years ago.
Wow, okay. So do you think it was your interest in the Peace Corps and that experience that wanted you, it would pique your interest in doing development work for your career?
I never thought that I would work with the United Nations, and it was a bit of a serendipitous, like many things are, landing there. And when I did with the UN, it definitely continued to pique my interest in working in the arena of post-conflict and conflict-affected countries, for sure.
Great. Well, thanks, Bron. Karen, can you tell us about yourself?
And likewise, thank you for having us on today. I'm Karen Walsh, and I too started in Peace Corps. From Peace Corps, then afterwards I received my Master's in Public Health. From Master's in Public Health, I then worked in refugee situations in Rwanda, Guinea, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Uganda. From then came back to the States and started working on OFDA, was working in OFDA Labs, Latin America and the Caribbean. After that, this is my first engagement. My next part was going in as I was working with IRG, and we became USAID personnel during the Iraq War. So went in initially with ORHAS, which is where I started working with civil affairs directly with the 352. And when the KPOC came out and supported the aid mission, and then got out of that, did Afghanistan, you name it, and then started doing work with OTI, Operative Transition Initiative. Last couple of years, I was out in Ghana working with a food security program along the Burkina border, helping bring 25,000 women to become better empowered economically so they could stave off any type of negative influences in the region, and then showed up with Dexis, and I'm now the Director of Stabilization for Dexis.
Excellent. And I'm so glad that we're having this discussion because we should have more guests like yourselves who cover down for the third D. And we often talk about defense, diplomacy, development, and a lot of the people who work in development are obviously the implementing partners and people on the ground, or people doing the back office work to support anyone in country doing development work and figuring out the programs for the host country. So really thank you for your time. I wanted to talk about what Dexis is, and would you start by answering how would you say that Dexis differs from other development organizations?
Sure, this is Bron. Dexis Consulting Group started in 2001, and it engaged primarily in the monitoring and evaluation arena. And we've grown to have a specific expertise serving not only USAID programs, but also security assistance and security cooperation programming. We conduct what is now called the Assessment, Monitoring, and Evaluation, AM&E, on behalf of Department of State, which of course brings in the Department of Defense implemented programming, so both Title 10 and Title 22 programming. And so inherent in our organization and expertise in monitoring and evaluation, and I think what makes us distinctive is we serve across the platform of defense diplomacy and development in the AM&E, or what's called monitoring and evaluation area. And then secondly, our other division is the implementation division of stabilization programming, as well as agriculture and economic development. So what you find mostly in other development firms is usually just the implementation side of things is an area of expertise, not both monitoring, evaluation, and the development programming. And then, again, secondly, I'm very proud to say that we work across the 3Ds.
Okay, great. And do you think that specialization has evolved based on the subject matter experts who have been in the Dexis network, or was this a deliberate choice to focus on what you do now?
It was a deliberate choice, and I think early on, even before monitoring and evaluation started its explosion within the USAID arena, there's a recognition by our founder, Mahir Desai, that in order to implement effective and agile programming, that's based on what they call collaborative learning and analysis, in ensuring that our programming implementation is based on lessons learned, which is really, you get that through your monitoring and evaluation programming. So I'm happy to say that we were engaged in this M&E work even before the explosion within the USAID market. So much so that now you have small businesses that exclusively focus only on M&E.
Yeah. So you were doing it before it was cool.
Yeah.
Very nice. So this often happens, I think, especially in country, but I just wanted to check, does Dexis hire only Americans, or do you work with a lot of local nationals in country?
Everyone. I think that it doesn't matter. We have third country nationals, and that's non-American and not the local population. So we work with anyone with expertise. So if you have it, we'll work with you.
Most of our programs are implemented by host country nationals, and that is overseen usually by one American and maybe two or so third country nationals, meaning someone, let's say, from UK, or it could be from a regional country or a European country. So it's, as Karen said, it's a mix, but I would say the majority is host country nationals.
Okay.
Right.
So I think civil affairs forces and many people in the military understand that the perspective of a lot of NGOs and development staff is that they typically don't like to interact with the military. There's some culture clash. What has been your experience working with the military?
I think for me, John, right now, I just got to stop you right there in a little sense of, understanding the development world. And this is just a little thing just on, for most of our people who work with, say, the development world, is that the more granular that you are about talking about NGOs versus contractors, the private sector, because everybody is quite different of how they do it. It's not a one-stop, one ideology or anything else like that. It all depends on, what's the goal of the organization itself. So if you are an NGO or not, in our speak is a nonprofit that would go out and work in the field, a nonprofit may or may not work with military. It's a discussion that they're going to have their board and their members. You look at places like IMC, where they do a lot of medical care, and they're right in the forefront working with the military all the time because they're combat focused. MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, they're going to be working. Doctors Without Borders are right along there because it's in the environment in which they work. Now, some NGOs and nonprofits globally may not want to work with you because they're stay based agriculturally and want to just work exclusively with farmers and are not, say, in a conflict-prone area. So it's different. Now, if you look at contractors, the private sector that works alongside, I see there is a great shift that's happened because of the areas in which USAID and Department of State have been going in and asking private sectors to work on contracts to be in those arenas. So we really see, since the work that I've done, I've really seen a huge shift since 9/11 of either some people will put a dead stop, no, we don't want to work with the military, and others are just that actually there is a great necessity in understanding culture and understanding how the military works in areas in which to engage in some type of work environment. But then again, people put limits. A lot of it is beneficiaries of the population in which they serve. So if they feel that there's security risks to their beneficiaries, they will pull back and say, look, security-wise, we just can't have you engage in this area. We'll still talk to you, but we got to figure out a way in which the security of those with whom we work is the number one priority, so that they don't become targets themselves if we're in these environments that are conflict-ridden or in the middle of conflict. So on that side, big change. I've worked with the military since, it's interesting. Prior to 9/11, the only people that we saw in uniform on the African continent were the Marines inside of an embassy. No one would be out on the continent in huge issues. It would have been the UN or the local government military supporting the UN's missions for, say, UNHCR. But this huge change, so it's evolving. And I think, Bron, you can add to this too. It's how everyone works is changing, and it will continue given what we see on the ground. And that's probably the best part of, in a learning environment is we're going to keep figuring out how to do this together and do it well.
As Karen mentioned, there were few folks that really worked alongside the military prior to 9/11. I think now, if you were to survey most development practitioners, I'd say 90% now have either worked alongside or been part of a military operation. In terms of logistics, at a minimum, leveraging the incredible capability that the military offers in terms of lift and transportation. In terms of CMOCs, of course, those prior to 9/11 that were involved in humanitarian assistance certainly had experience in Rwanda and other places. Again, I think that within the nonprofit humanitarian world, there's a recognition, again, of the incredible organizational capacity of the military. And in terms of stabilization, there is more and more, I think, experiences of embedding, meaning embedding development practitioners inside of a civil affairs operation or within SOF. And we ourselves, Dexis, had placed an expert within a SOF element in Somalia, and it was through an OTI program. And the intent, of course, is to help deconflict some of the programming in X area of the country, and to help coordinate a bit better so that the military operation is not misapplying their assistance. And of course, the intent within the SOF element is more around shaping for a future offensive. But we, of course, as a partner of both USAID and of the 3Ds, understand the objective of the DoD, and we certainly understand the importance.
That's great to hear. And you threw out a term which leads me to my next question. You said CMOC. For the CA listeners, that's obviously the Civil Military Operations Center. The military is certainly well known for its acronyms and jargon, but I know that the NGO community also has shorthand as well. So what do you suggest CA forces should do to learn the language used in the development community?
So I think, John, one of the big things that for anyone that works with development, I think is just understanding where you're coming from. So if anyone is in civil affairs right now, you have your first language is Army. Your second language is SOF. Your third language is BA. And we're trying to get you to have a fourth language, and that's development. Some people are absolutely multilingual. They get the jargon down, taxonomy, they know the acronyms, everyone gets it. but it's just, I think that getting all the way to development as your fourth language, it becomes sort of concepts and ideas, and maybe the lingo is not as important. It would be great for everyone to communicate well, and that's something that we, as development practitioners working with military, need to do a lot better. We need to understand your lingo as well. But I definitely think that there's, we used to do a long time ago, which was USAID 101, how to break down the easy things, what is, but quite frankly, a lot of it is about training and training dollars and training time. And, if that's not part of your, any of your needs, and people don't see the needs, they're not going to request it. So, I think that some people get it down, it's like working with another colleague, and some will never understand it, no matter how hard they try, because the three languages that they work with already are enough.
Yeah, a good point. Folks, you've been listening to an interview with Karen Walsh and Bron Morrison. They're from Dexis Consulting Group. Dexis Consulting Group advances security and prosperity through gold standard management services. They work with organizations that promote stability, resilience, and prosperity through social and peacekeeping programs across agriculture and economic growth, stabilization, and security sector assistance. When we come back, we'll speak with Karen and Bron about the services that Dexis provides in technical areas, its approach to stabilization and conflict management, and some more connections with civil affairs. We'll be right back.
Check out the Civil Affairs Call for Issue papers. The deadline to submit a paper is August 28th. Civil Affairs can find better integration as a force for influence, collaboration, and competition for convergent threats and challenges for multi-domain and information operations, now called Joint All-Domain Operations. As the nation's warrior diplomats, the CA Corps must modernize, especially for gray zone competition, and foster a learning organization. It must reinforce supported command understanding of CA Corps competencies and capabilities at tactical and operational levels. It must seize opportunities to be a greater force for influence through national strategic initiatives like the Stabilization Assistance Review and the Global Engagement Center. And it must help build an industrial base in applied social sciences and related technologies. The Civil Affairs Association and its partners invite civil military professionals to submit originally written issue papers. The deadline is August 28th. For more information, including paper guidelines, visit Civil Affairs, all one word, ASSOC.org.
Welcome back to the 1CA podcast. I'm your host, John McElligott. Karen and Bron, I wanted to build on this discussion and talk about the services that Dexis provides. You have several technical areas. We mentioned at the early part of the show that you work in stability, resilience, a lot of focus in agriculture and economic growth. You're both working in stabilization, security sector assistance. So which areas do you think most closely apply to the mission of civil affairs forces in the military? And where's the intersection between Dexis and civil affairs?
This is Bron. I would offer that, the stabilization mission is most aligned with the civil affairs mission. Obviously, since 9/11, that's been what used to be called phase 1 through 4. The intent also, though, within the counterterrorism objectives also align with our services as it applies to non-kinetic programming, the shaping part of CP operations. I also would offer that, along with civil affairs, we also work to support information operations, which I know is another branch, but do a lot of strategic communications for NISO programming as well.
Great. Yeah, that's good to hear, because we, CA forces, work closely with psychological operations and information operations. In fact, on the reserve side, they're within the same command.
Right. And I also think that a lot of the stuff that we do, part of our M&E stuff is that we go out on SFAS and do a lot of that work to see how people are engaging, and not only from a performance but a result standpoint. I think one of the interesting things as from prior experience, and also what we've seen that works is just that ability to sit down with groups and to talk to them about, how long is your deployment? What are you doing? It's just a 3 to 6 month deployment. What are you thinking? What are your objectives? And if you're looking at those development objective goals, or you want to engage in the community, what is realistic? What is something that you can plan? How do you make a team successful? And oftentimes, we see that the very successful teams do a lot of the preparatory work beforehand. When Bron and I were working at GAI, we had TA teams that would go in and out of Sri Lanka, and we had our OCI program out there. And what was great was that because you had people who understood the development world and understood that the contractors are the ones that support OTI, Office Transition Initiative, that they came actually to GAI to talk to our group of how they could be more successful working alongside of them. They got the okay from OTI to come and talk to us, but it was that understanding of the people on the ground working with the program and how could we work together in a great, a synergistic way. And so the team that did all that preparatory work and reached out, it was incredibly successful, and they got a lot of things done because we handed them the low-hanging fruit. Now, the teams that weren't successful in Sri Lanka and actually got pulled was when they decided to operate outside of what the ambassador thought was acceptable, and they got PNG'd. It's understanding how that works and the work of who's on the ground, how to work with them, are they effective, will go a long way into becoming more successful.
So that's a good point. I want to build on or go back to that. The term PNG, persona non grata. Can you describe how badly a team has to screw up essentially for the embassy to kick you out of the country? And how you're saying that to avoid that, go for the low-hanging fruit and provide, follow the guidance of the country team and the partners who are already there.
Yeah, I would just reiterate what Karen was saying. In most of these post-conflict countries, the Office of Transition Initiative has a presence, and that presence is through contractors. So meeting with the implementing or contracting partner on the ground will immediately give you the level of atmospherics that they can provide is a bit mind-boggling, because the comprehensive nature of Office of Transition Initiative is such that by visiting the headquarters, you will be briefed on a database of the grants that are being implemented, and therefore you can avoid replicating in not only thematically or in geographically programming. And so I'm not so sure of what's required to get PNG'd. Karen can offer that more. I know it's not terribly frequent, but I do think that sometimes CA units will get criticized for not having an impact, and I think they can avoid that by seeking out organizations, particularly through the country team of USAID's Office of Transition Initiative, and or just talking with the AID mission in general, because often there are stabilization programs that are done after OTIs in a country. So that will help you avoid being seen as not necessarily delivering programs that are with big impact.
Right. I think, John, the only thing that I want to talk about is how do you get PNG? So a lot of it comes, and these are just some suggestions not to do, would be that if you're going to be in plain clothes, that you don't identify yourself as a development worker, or that you're aligned that way, that, it all depends on how you're getting inserted into the country and the work, but a lot of it is, that civilian-military divide. With all the stuff that we do on the ground, we're open and transparent with our partners because we don't want anyone to get confused that we are doing anything but development work. So, and I think if you misrepresent yourself, that could be a question that goes back to the data from the ambassador gets told that how you're representing yourself on the ground isn't what was stipulated in your terms with, having a DAT represent you coming into country. Other things that if you go against, if you're working with the military that we've seen and that they feel that you're surveilling them because you're trying to do work with communities that don't want you to, whereas, and that could be another reason as well. So those are just two little examples, but hopefully there's not that many, I agree, but I'll say it this way. The PNG side is more from ever working with other partners, that once you maybe perhaps you haven't been a good partner on the ground or demanding or doing things that you were told, please don't do this or don't come to our community, then the implementing partner on the ground will just, will close off ties and won't answer your phone calls anymore.
Okay. So I wanted to get to the Dexis approach for stabilization and conflict mitigation. Each area is just incredibly complex and difficult to succeed in, but nonetheless we do it, right? There's a good reason why Dexis and others are working in stabilization. What is the Dexis approach for it? How do you even start?
We have to understand that I think also the government, U.S. government has revealed through their stabilization assistance review that stabilization programming is inherently political, and in a number of these countries, the politics are incredibly complex and even change within a country from region to region. And so for us, like many though, but for us, we base it on research and analysis and ensuring that all of our programmings are informed by granular level research and analysis, meaning that when we get into a country, we know that we are not the experts necessarily, even remotely, compared to those on the ground that are host country nationals. But in order to have a neutral viewpoint, we engage with research firms that also offer broad ethnic representation as well as sound political science methodologies to ensure that when we go into a particular region, we know the who, what, where, when, and how, and the PMISI, the political, military, economic, social, and information atmospherics. Karen, I hand it over to you.
Sure. I think that one of the, Bron and I have just been going around different places, and what I think is the absolute critical thing is that we aren't the experts, but we're going to talk to everyone. There's no one we don't want to talk to. Getting in meetings, having conversations, being directly listening to people, and not coming with this is the way it should go, because part of that idea that development is not a science, it's an art. You will always learn new things. You'll hear stuff. That political dynamic could be a daily one. It could be, as Bron was saying, regional, ethnic, gendered. It could be the weather could impact things. Look at what COVID's doing right now. I mean, we're looking at different countries of what that impacts from governance role. What is that going to do for security? What is that going to do for outreach to those without a voice? So, I mean, how things change on such a rapid basis. But most of it for us is you need to be on the ground and asking these questions, and it's that human network that building over decades of interaction of people that you've had, and say if Bron's going to X country, her first thing is like, who do I know? Who's on the ground? Who's working programs? Can we go meet with them? How do we do all of that work? And sometimes that's the limit for the military, because you don't have that ability to go out there and talk to 1 million people because of the constraints in which you're operating under. But for us, if we don't have all of that information, we're going to be making incorrect, assumptions on our side. We've got to be a lot more open to everyone's opinion matters.
Yeah, exactly. Ladies, I want to ask you one final question here, and that's, what recommendations do you have for civil affairs forces to focus on training? For example, should we, based on your experience working with CA forces, should CA forces become better versed in technical areas or foreign languages, regional studies, or something else like understanding the languages, the 4 languages, Karen, you talked about, starting with Army and SOF and civil affairs, and then maybe adding development?
There's so many suggestions, John. I don't know where to start.
Let's talk about maybe a country where you worked with CA forces in the last couple of years. What added value did the CA team bring? Do you think that their human interaction or technology, was there any technology platform that they used that was very helpful. What's the added value of CA Forces bringing to the table when interacting with development firms like Dexis? And what were there gaps where you thought CA Forces should have been better, and therefore we could focus more training on that?
For me, I think there's a lot of, I know there's training for CA Forces on sort of the history of the country and the cultural mores and, the regional studies aspect. But I think what's missing and what both Karen and I have often done pro bono is to go down to Fort Bragg and give them the current operating environment picture. I think that's the missing piece of training programs. And while bringing down a USAID foreign service officer or civil officer can be helpful, I really believe that having implementing partner that's operating on the ground in country can give not only a snapshot of the operating environment, but who are the people that you need to meet with upon arrival, and giving them the actual contact information and a short overview of their scope of work. Because without that kind of granular information, it's going to take a while for you to get up to speed, because it's overwhelming. In countries that are, let's pick Somalia, there's an enormous amount of organizations that work in Somalia. And I think unless you have an orientation and a bit of a handoff of contacts, it would take you a very long time within a 6-month rotation to get up to speed. So that's what I really believe would be very helpful.
So I want to add to Bron, you're talking, and I agree, that's the initial understanding, and so that you're not walking in blind, to contact. The other thing I see is that there's just not enough time to explain good development. What is development? What's a grant? What's a project? What's an activity? How do you do it? How do you become successful? What's attainable? I think you have a lot of training from people who work at CERP funds. You have all this stuff from the past. How much was DACA funding? All this other stuff. You're there 3 to 6 months. How are you going to be successful? What are things that are actually real? What can you actually do in your time frame, given what your priorities are from higher headquarters? How do you fit into that scope of work? How do you fit into that understanding of what you need to do, and how do you plan to be successful? So you want to give money, you want to do a MedCap, those are easy things, but there's so much more that you could do to further where you're going. And I think part of the problem with CA is the constant rotation. It's a question for all teams, from anybody in thought. It's like no one wants to trust the group before them. They all want to start up and do their own thing. It's like, where's the continuity plan? Where's anything that you could keep building on success from their prior iteration? And if you're all one team, why are we still not going towards whatever? Agree, priorities do change, things get shifted, but at least know how to build on what was previously done and either extend, input more money or more people or more effort, and then your scope can change, but at least you're still going in the right direction of whatever that is based on what you're supposed to do. You're like 1,000 points of light, but nothing's ever coordinated. So how would you look at doing things differently?
Karen, Bron, I think that's great feedback. Thank you very much for sharing it. I hope the listeners will take that to heart, and anyone who's developing the training or preparing a team to go overseas should do their homework and connect with as many development professionals like yourselves as possible. I want to thank you for your time. We have Karen Walsh and Bron Morrison. They're both from Dexis. The Dexis Consulting Group advances security and prosperity through gold standard management services. They work with organizations that promote stability, resilience, and prosperity through social and peacekeeping programs across agriculture and economic growth, stabilization, and security sector assistance. You can find more information about Dexis at dexisonline.com. Karen and Bron, thank you so much for being on the One CA podcast.
Thanks, John. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
If you enjoyed this podcast and others, please remember to subscribe and hit like. so the 1CA podcast team gets important feedback and support. The Civil Affairs Association is a proud sponsor of the 1CA podcast and the Eunomia Journal. You can find more podcasts like this on the www.1capodcast.org. Again, that's www.1capodcast.org. The Eunomia Journal is expanding its content to reach a broader audience and engagement across defense and governments, to include other partners and allied countries. New sections in the Warrior Scholar Corner and the Team Room aim to deliver content useful to our members. Check out the Eunomia Journal at www.eunomiajournal.com. Again, that's www.eunomiajournal.com. If you're not a member yet, visit the main CA Association website and find a new range of membership options. Starting with cadets or midshipmen, membership is only $10 a year. We then have our basic annual membership at $40 per year and 2 years at $60, or finally, a 3-year membership for only $80. Our most popular and best value option is a lifetime membership at a one-time price of $200. Be a member and don't miss out. 2020 is a big year with transformational changes underway. Lots of new opportunities for members. Don't miss out.
Thank you for spending some time with us. Please subscribe and come back for another installment of 1CA. Until then, be safe and secure the victory.